I've never played Fire Emblem. I've heard it's good, but I'd have to get a hold of a copy of it so I could feel justified in playing it. Yeah. It's my favorite game. It bounces back and forth between my my top 3 favorite games. Mostly just my top 2, because while Persona 3 is in my top 3, I've only had one playthrough of it. I've heard Fire Emblem's really good. Like, I've heard a lot about that series. A lot of good things about that series, and I've experienced Ike and Marth not the way they're supposed to be experienced, though. I experienced them via Smash Brothers instead of Fire Emblem. But yeah. Essentially, my January, I'm not really sure how long my annual playthroughs are going to take up, but I expect it to be all of January, at least. Especially considering one of the games is Persona 3. And I am very grind heavy, so that essentially equates to me playing a lot of Persona 3. When the combat is only a small portion of the game. I'd also like to get Persona 4 out of the way, but that would probably take me a long time to finish. Wow, I missed a 90. Oh yeah, I forgot about Roy. Roy I remember too. I need to play them. I just haven't. The next 2 fights, Ranza might actually be doing something because I have bad memories from those fights, so I'd rather not cause said memories to happen again. Granted, that was like my first few playthroughs when I was young, but better safe than sorry. So they'll be very fast fights. Compared to this one, anyway. But the fights here still aren't the worst fights I've ever experienced in this game, because Riovane's Castle. I think Riovane's Castle is generally accepted as the brick wall people hit when they play this game the first time. all because of literally one fight. It sounds really interesting, and it makes... I'm a real big sword buff, even though I don't own any swords. So the more you talk about swords, the more I just want to see it. But I currently have no gaming budget, so I'm limited to games I already own. Or games I can get my hands on via friends and family. And none of them, if I recall, have owned a Fire Emblem game, which upsets me. I've got friends who might, but it's unlikely. Because they're primarily PC gamers, and have been since they were young. Like, they got into PC gaming when PC gaming was literally in its infancy, which is crazy because we aren't that old. Like, it's not Commodore infancy, but standard PC infancy. So this is my standard Ramza. 2 swords Ramza with the Knight class. Someone's using my other rune blade and I don't appreciate it. I took that off her for the purpose of using it on Ramza. I lost Alma, so I lost that fucking beret, I think. Oh no, it just takes it off. That's good to know. I never knew that in the times I've played through this. I never know which fights let Ramza sit in the formation and which ones move him on the count of story. I could play this game back to back to back and I still wouldn't remember them all. Which is slightly upsetting that I could call that fact. This fight, I breezed through it the very first playthrough I did. My first playthrough, I gave up on monsters after chapter 2 because I realized what a pain in the dick they are. But, see, I'm only 23 now, so when I played it when it came out, I was like 8 or 9. I don't remember what year it came out, so I can't verify how old I was. I might have been in my 10s, so I was younger, but my memory's always been really good for useless information. Like, amazingly good for useless information. So, if it's something I want to remember, I will. And, my first playthrough wasn't a monk because I hadn't decided on a class for my Ramza. But, it was essentially a red chocobo, a monk, a chemist, and a black mage was my team. And that playthrough never saw the end of the game. But it's still my first playthrough because it's my first attempt to beat the game. But it couldn't see the end of the game because that was before I started grinding. Since I was a kid, and I had played Final Fantasy VII and Final Fantasy VIII before, kids typically don't have the patience, but because of Final Fantasy VIII and Final Fantasy Tactics and the experiences I had with them, as both of those games, my playthrough halted at one point. And I could not continue the playthrough. It was impossible. Now, looking back on it, there was a way for me to fix my Final Fantasy VIII playthrough. I've found it. I didn't know how to do it as a kid though, and there was no way of me finding out. I can guarantee that. I wasn't dumb, but I wasn't very observant. Because essentially, there's one point in this game that's generally accepted as the hardest point in the game. And that is Riovaine's Castle Fight 2. The fight versus Waygraph. I didn't get stopped at 10, but by that point I was older and I had the experiences with Tactics in 8. I will never make those mistakes again, but entirely different ways. Most people learned multiple save files. I learned never save in between fights. Never. If it tells you there's no easy way to go back, I don't save. And I've carried that stubborn, pointless habit since I played through this game because of the Waygraph fight. Waygraph was easy. Valius is not. And Valius is generally accepted as the hardest fight in the entire game. And easily understood why, I think. It's a small room and he summons Cyclops over and over and over again. And he has a lot of HP for that level, so it's like the difficulty spike to end all difficulty spikes. Jesus, I can't talk. At least for this game. And I saved before the Waygraph fight with the samurai build, and because of the way I play games, I sell everything that I don't need anymore. I haven't been in this playthrough because I have that memory of the Waygraph fight. Typically that doesn't happen though, because I like to conserve all the money I can. So anything I'm not using needs to go back to the shop where it can be sold. That's kind of my process. Somebody else might use it. So Somebody lost their helmet. You lost your helmet. Damn. Normally I buy more shit, but I didn't think about it. Anyway, the Valius fight stopped me because I was stuck in a half-assed samurai build because I was leveling samurai because I thought it was an interesting class. That experience was not fun, and that's never going to happen again. The Final Fantasy VIII experience. Which if you remember Final Fantasy VIII, the playthrough of it, there's a point where you can save inside Bomb City. Inside the city, because it's been taken over, you can't leave. Now, as I've gotten older, I've learned you can actually leave if you need to. When I was younger, there was no way of me finding that. I don't like just 2 because then there's a possibility of not having it. Maybe 2 for every character I'm using. So, like, at least 10. Because I use 2 swords. I use 2 swords a lot because it's fundamentally broken. When coupled with a class like the Knight, it's extremely powerful in being able to one-shot enemies and, or extremely cripple enemies. Anyway, Diablo wouldn't break your save though. Diablo is you always have to fight Diablo at a point where you could go back and grind. And, get more stats as needed. Which, when I do my annual playthrough of 8, you'll be able to see how I play the game. It's a lot of card games at the beginning of the game. Not just for the special cards, but for all my spells that I can get at the time, all of my item pieces I want to get early, like energy crystal. I want to get an energy crystal at the beginning of the game so that I don't have to painstakingly get it later in the game. It gets much harder the longer you wait. But yeah, my first Final Fantasy VIII playthrough was halted because of the fight in Balm Garden against Fujin and Rajan. I called her Fu because I also played the Kingdom Hearts series. Well, at level 30, you just unlocked the tier 3. The final tier, endgame tier, 30 to 100. Which kinda sucks for you. First time I fought him I was about 20-something, and he was still hard. The best part about the Diablo fight is unless he uses his physical attacks, he can't kill you. That doesn't mean much, but it is important to note. So you can prepare at any point to protect yourself. I cheesed Diablo by getting Tornado very early. Now that's not standard cheese, but it is cheese. Anyway, the Fujin and Rajan fight. I went in there without proper protection. My stats weren't very good because I didn't have the magic. I didn't have a full grasp of how the magic system works with the junction system when I was a kid. So Fujin would just destroy me. And I couldn't leave, because there was no way I was going to learn how to leave. My brain I wasn't that observant as a kid. So my playthrough was ended at the Fujin and Rajan fight. Because I saved inside Bomb City. Extremely upsetting as a kid. But not like heartbreaking, though. Those two games, 8 and Tactics, prepared me for Final Fantasy X when I finally got my hands on it. I tried so much did I try. But I couldn't find what I needed to leave. So I assumed they were right, you really can't leave. And this was before 10, so they don't warn you that you're about to go to a place where you can't get out when you really couldn't get out. They didn't do that. With 10 they did. They were like, well, you can't go back anymore. With 7 and 8 and even Tactics, they don't warn you. With Tactics, there's a better feeling of, I can't get out of this area. Because you walked into it and now you haven't seen the world map anymore. That's a confusing statement. And I'd love to know more. Wow, I saved her life. I didn't have help with completing those games, but I did have help with completing this game, technically. Not much help, by the time I got a playthrough that was going to finish the game, I grinded. That doesn't sound possible, but I could believe it. It's not really outside the realm of possibility either, in all honesty. I don't recall it happening in 7 and 8, but there are games where I've had just items show up out of nowhere. This fight, because of the doorways and its way graph, what caused me a lot of issues my first playthrough. That's why I switched Ramza for Take No Prisoners mode. And even though Waygraph got off a lucky crush punch, that was about all the enemy got in that fight. That's impossible. Literally an impossibility. So I don't know how you had that. But, interesting. I don't always get Ultima Weapon on 7. I do want to play through it on Cast eventually. But Ultima Weapon is one of the hardest fights in the game. Like, compared to the story fights. The story fights aren't hard. The game doesn't level with you, so with enough grinding, the game is a pushover. Which should be the case with any game where you grind. It isn't necessarily with 8, but with 8, the game is a pushover once you've junctioned yourself properly. So it's a different way of evening out the game. This was a great scene, seeing it the first time, and as was the end of Riovaine's castle, because you get to see both spectrums of the Zodiac Stones. That sounds more on the border of Game Shark and Action Replay than just a glitch at that point. I can't say it was because it wasn't my file and I don't know anything about it. Nor would I accuse anybody of that, because there are people who think it's the ultimate awfulness to cheat in a game. I don't care, but I don't see challenge as all that important either, so... It's still interesting, so... Yeah, I figured it out. I know what I did wrong. It was just, the places I was at weren't selling swords, so I couldn't duplicate swords. My uncle had a Game Shark. And he actually helped me with a Yu-Gi-Oh game, which that was the shit when I grew up. You can tell I'm like the face of the 90s kid right now.